You notice how the boy's family is proud of its Andalusian roots. They trace their lineage back to a time when Muslim Spain flourished with libraries, music, and learning. But history has already turned its cycle once, and those glorious Andalusian days are fading, driven out by shifting powers. Families like his have carried their learning across the sea to North Africa. His household is filled with books, recitations, and long discussions about theology and law. Knowledge here is not ornamental, it is survival, prestige, and the family's ticket into the ruling courts. You sit with young Ibn Khaldun as he learns to read the Quran, his small voice reciting verses that echo through the tiled courtyard. Teachers correct his pronunciation with patient precision. His studies are not limited to scripture. He begins to memorize poetry, absorb philosophy, and learn the art of eloquence, even as a child. He notices the sharp divide between the world of merchants in the market and the refined language of scholars inside his home. This contrast plants in him an early awareness of how society works on multiple layers at once. One well-known fact about his youth is his tutelage under the finest scholars of Tunis, men who themselves carried fragments of Andalusian brilliance. He memorized not just words, but ways of thinking, learning to see patterns in arguments and connections between ideas. And yet, there is a quirky tidbit tucked into those years. He also took pleasure in music. Some accounts suggest that he was fascinated by rhythm, which later, in a strange way, echoed into his fascination with cycles, repetition, and patterns in history. As you follow him through these years, you begin to see how his world is shaped by contrasts. Tunis is no sleepy provincial town. It is a crossroads of trade and ideas, vulnerable to shifting dynasties and the push of Mediterranean powers. You walk through its markets and see silk from the east, spices that sting your nose, and rough sailors arguing over cargo. Then you step back into his home where silence rules. Ink dries slowly on parchment, and elders debate fine points of theology. The boy listens, not always understanding, but storing it all like treasure. Historians still argue whether his early family life was more privileged or precarious. Some believe his noble ancestry gave him immediate access to courts and power. Others suggest that though the lineage was proud, the reality was more fragile, with wealth and influence constantly in question. That uncertainty, like a shadow cast across the boy's life, may have shaped his lifelong obsession with the rise and fall of families, dynasties, and empires. You watch him slip into teenage years, when studies intensify. There are nights when the oil lamp burns low and his eyes sting, but the lessons must continue. He absorbs logic, mathematics, jurisprudence, and even astronomy. Each discipline is like another piece in a puzzle that he cannot yet see fully. For him, knowledge is both shield and sword. In a world where dynasties topple overnight, the scholar has a chance to endure, his name protected by wisdom rather than wealth. Still, there are moments of levity. Imagine him pausing from study, sneaking out into the alleys with friends, listening to storytellers or watching horsemen practice in the open fields. He laughs, perhaps even improvises verses of poetry, flexing the skills that will one day flow into his eloquent writings. These glimpses remind you that he was not born a stern philosopher, but a boy of curiosity, appetite, and play. As you walk further into this memory of his early life, you sense the beginnings of a mind that questions rather than accepts. When he hears elders talk of fate, he wonders why dynasties really fall. Is it truly God's will, or is there some hidden pattern beneath the surface? The seeds of the Muqaddimah, though decades away, are already germinating in this boy sitting cross-legged with a wax tablet on his knees. The home environment, half sacred and half political, creates a rhythm that will follow him into adulthood. Every guest at his father's table may be a scholar, a bureaucrat, or a spy. Every book he touches might contain answers or raise more questions, and you, following his steps, begin to sense why Ibn Khaldun would one day write that history itself has laws, almost like the laws of nature, waiting to be uncovered. As night falls over Tunis, and lamps flicker in narrow windows, you imagine him laying his head down after long study. The city hums quietly, restless with the weight of change. You breathe in the salt air from the harbor, hear the distant call of sailors, and sense that this boy will not remain a student forever. A cycle is already beginning, one that will carry him into courts, prisons, deserts, and across continents. And you, gentle traveler through his story, have only just stepped into the threshold of his restless mind. You step into the echoing courtyards of a palace in Tunis, where patent tiles shine under the glow of lantern light, and courtiers murmur softly, their voices like a low tide rolling through the hall. Ibn Khaldun, now a young man, is no longer the boy bent over tablets in a quiet courtyard. He carries himself with a mixture of shyness and sharpened intellect. Dressed neatly in flowing robes, his eyes scanning every detail as though the world is a book to be read. This is his first taste of court life, a place where knowledge is not only honored but weaponized, where wit can be the difference between favor and exile. He is still in his early 20s, but already you see how carefully he chooses his words. One wrong phrase before a ruler could cost him his future. One well-placed compliment, however, could open doors to advancement. Court life is dazzling, filled with music, processions, and rituals, Yet beneath the beauty lies a web of ambition. You can almost smell the incense, see the glint of gold-threaded curtains, and hear the subtle cough of someone impatient for power. One well-known fact about this time is Ibn Khaldun's role as a scribe in the chancery, where official letters and decrees were written with precision. In an age when a slip of the pen could distort meaning and lead to war, this was no small responsibility. He learned to cloak meaning in elegant phrasing, to write what pleased without revealing too much. And through it all, he sharpened his understanding of rulers and their fragile egos. But there is a quieter, almost humorous detail too. Ibn Khaldun, despite being so young, occasionally mimicked the pompous speech of officials among friends. Imagine him in private, exaggerating the flowery phrases of decrees, making companions laugh before falling back into serious study. That ability to both respect and poke fun at authority reveals a subtlety in his character, a mind that never allowed itself to be entirely swallowed by power. The palace air itself feels divided, half-perfumed elegance, half-simmering tension. You walk alongside him as he listens carefully during gatherings, where rulers weigh alliances, courtiers flatter, and rivals whisper in corners. He notices who hesitates before speaking, who dares to make bold claims, and who sits in silence, calculating outcomes. The young scholar is learning that politics is a theater, and every role has meaning. Historians still argue whether Ibn Khaldun sought court life eagerly or was drawn in reluctantly by family expectation. Some claim he pursued power with ambition, eager to rise, while others suggest he always preferred books to banquets, pulled into politics only by circumstance. Whatever the truth, you can see him navigating these halls with a quiet adaptability, always calculating, always listening, always learning. At moments, you sense his discomfort. The extravagance of palace life contrasts sharply with the world outside. While rulers sip sherbet in marble halls, farmers struggle with droughts, merchants haggle for survival, and tribes on the frontier plot their next move. Ibn Khaldun begins to realize that this fragile glitter rests on shifting sands. He knows dynasties do not last forever. Already he sees cracks in the walls of power. You drift through a day in his life here. In the morning he studies legal codes and commentaries, preparing himself for questions that might arise in council. By midday he stands among other scribes, drafting documents, his calligraphy smooth, his phrases respectful yet firm. By nightfall he may be summoned to a private chamber, where a ruler or minister confides in him, testing his loyalty, his intelligence, his ability to keep secrets. Every interaction teaches him something new about human ambition. And yet, when the halls grow quiet, he retreats into his thoughts. You picture him seated with a candle flickering, reviewing the day's conversations in silence. He wonders, why do rulers rise to glory only to collapse into weakness? Why do courtiers, once loyal, turn traitor when fortunes shift? These questions, so common in politics, begin to crystallize in his mind as part of a larger pattern, one that transcends individuals. The court is also a place of unexpected encounters. At one gathering he might find himself seated near a poet reciting verses about the fleeting nature of life. At another, a jurist debates fine points of law that remind Ibn Khaldun of the delicate balance between justice and power. Even astrologers play a role, casting horoscopes for rulers eager to see their fortunes written in the stars. He listens, skeptical yet attentive, collecting every perspective like pieces of a puzzle. Over time, you notice how his presence changes. No longer just a young scholar, he is becoming a man trusted with responsibility. He learns when to speak and when silence is more powerful. He grows fluent not only in Arabic prose but in the language of survival, knowing when to agree, when to defer, and when to quietly withdraw. In every decision, you sense that he is both participant and observer, already thinking of how to one day record the truth behind these glittering illusions. For you walking with him now, there is a humbling awareness. The grandeur you see is temporary. The polished marble, the embroidered cushions, the jeweled lamps, they will all fade, replaced by another dynasty's ornaments. Ibn Khaldun senses it too. Though he works to serve his masters, a part of him studies their fragility. He begins to see history as a series of waves, each cresting with brilliance before crashing into decline. As you leave the palace halls with him at the end of a long day, the streets of Tunis feel cooler, the night air soothing after the heat of courtly intrigue. The stars are scattered above, silent witnesses to the cycles of rulers and scholars, victories and betrayals. Ibn Khaldun walks home, his robes trailing softly on the cobblestones, his mind alive with questions that will one day shape one of the most remarkable books ever written. You find yourself in the shifting landscapes of the Maghreb, where kingdoms rise and crumble almost as quickly as sandcastles swept by the tide. Ibn Khaldun, still a young man but seasoned enough by his first courtly experiences, begins to move between dynasties. The year is the 14th century, and the Maghreb is a land stitched together by rival thrones, each promising stability yet unraveling under the weight of ambition. You travel with him as he crosses borders, carrying letters of introduction, his reputation as a sharp mind preceding him. The region itself feels restless. In Tunis, the Hafsids claim authority, while in Fez the Marinids exert their power. Further west, dynasties in Tlemcen and beyond fight for dominance. To serve in one court is to risk alienating another. And so Ibn Khaldun learns to navigate carefully, balancing loyalty with survival. The palaces may glitter, but beneath their carpets lies treachery as real as any battlefield. One well-known fact from this period is Ibn Khaldun's service under multiple dynasties, sometimes praised as a trusted advisor, other times eyed with suspicion as a potential traitor. His career reads like a game of chess, each move calculated, each alliance fragile. He rises quickly, entrusted with delicate negotiations, only to fall just as quickly when fortunes shift. It is a dangerous rhythm, yet one that sharpens his awareness of political cycles. There is also a curious tidbit, almost easy to miss. In Granada, while on a diplomatic mission, he met the celebrated poet and vizier Ibn. Together, they shared discussions of literature and philosophy. Two men of letters standing in the gardens of the Alhambra, their words drifting like poetry into the evening air. For a moment, politics faded, and friendship bloomed between minds. It is a reminder that even in times of instability, beauty and intellectual companionship endure. As you move beside him through these courts, you notice how he carries himself differently than others. While many seek favor with flattery, he uses a mixture of honesty and tact. At times, his bluntness makes enemies, but more often it earns grudging respect. He is learning that rulers, no matter how powerful, hunger for truth wrapped in silk. His skill lies in delivering insight without appearing threatening. Historians still argue whether his shifting loyalties were acts of pragmatism or opportunism. Some paint him as a survivor, adapting to circumstances in a turbulent world. Others accuse him of being too quick to abandon one ruler for another. Yet, as you stand with him in those courtyards, you see the truth may be simpler. He had little choice. In a land where dynasties fell with the seasons, to remain loyal to one master was often to perish with him. Each court offers its own lessons. In Fez, he witnesses the splendor of Marinid authority, the grandeur of processions, and the sharpness of rivalries among ministers. In Tlemcen, he feels the weight of a smaller court's vulnerability, the constant fear of being swallowed by stronger neighbors. In Granada, he tastes the richness of Andalusian refinement, a reminder of his family's heritage across the sea. Every stop imprints on him a piece of the puzzle, deepening his conviction that history moves in cycles, repeating patterns of rise and fall. You walk with him into chambers where secret deals are made. A ruler whispers his suspicion of betrayal. An advisor quietly proposes a risky alliance. Ibn Khaldun listens, weighs the options, and drafts words that may tip the balance of power. Yet he knows, even as the ink dries, that tomorrow may undo it all. He has seen decrees, celebrated one day and burned the next. He understands that power is not solid but fluid, always reshaping itself. And amid these shifting allegiances, Ibn Khaldun develops a habit. He watches not only the rulers but the people around them. He notes the soldier's discipline, the merchant's confidence, the peasant's endurance. He observes how the strength of a dynasty is not only in its throne, but in the cohesion of its society. It is here, in the constant movement between courts, that he begins to refine his famous concept of Asabiyyah, the social solidarity that holds groups together. When that solidarity weakens, collapse is inevitable. There are nights when he feels the exhaustion of this life. Imagine him, alone in his chamber, the flicker of a lamp reflecting on his weary eyes. He writes letters to family left behind, unsure when or if he will return. He dreams of stability, of a world less fragile, yet he knows that such dreams are rare luxuries in the Maghreb. And still, there are moments of unexpected beauty. You walk with him through gardens scented with orange blossoms, fountains murmuring in courtyards where moonlight dances on marble. You hear poets recite verses about the fleetingness of power, and for a while, the political noise fades. In these quiet pauses, Ibn Khaldun gathers strength, storing reflections that will one day spill into the pages of his great work. As dawn breaks over yet another palace, you realize that his path is not one of steady ascent, but of restless movement. He is both participant and observer, entangled in the drama yet quietly analyzing it, already translating lived experience into theory. And as you leave this shifting world of courts and thrones behind him, you sense that turbulence will continue to shadow his steps, leading him toward prisons, deserts, and revelations still to come. You follow him now into a darker passage of his life, when the glitter of courts fades and heavy iron doors close behind him. Ibn Khaldun, still not yet middle-aged, finds himself imprisoned after a political downfall. The reasons are tangled in the usual web of jealousy, rivalry, and suspicion. To serve in so many courts is to invite whispers, and eventually those whispers reach a ruler's ears. Chains replace robes, solitude replaces conversation, and suddenly the man who once wrote decrees now waits in silence behind stone walls. The cell is cold, the air damp with the smell of earth and neglect. You sit with him on a rough mat, watching him adjust to this unwanted pause. At first, there is anger. To be brought low after serving faithfully, after speaking carefully, is an injustice he feels keenly. Yet slowly, as the days pass and silence stretches long, reflection replaces bitterness. He has no court to impress, no ruler to please. There is only his mind, sharp as ever, and the endless hours to wander its corridors. One well-known fact is that Ibn Khaldun spent nearly 2 years in prison during his service in Fez. Stripped of position, he was left to contemplate not only his misfortune but the fragility of all political lives. Rulers who seem untouchable one month fall to conspiracies the next. Ministers rise only to vanish. Even scribes, careful as they are, can be undone by envy. This is not just his story but the story of every court in the Maghreb. And there is a quieter, more human detail. Even in confinement, Ibn Khaldun could not abandon learning. Accounts suggest that he recited from memory the vast poetry and lore he had studied, rehearsing verses to himself in the dim light so that his mind would not dull. Imagine him pacing slowly, chanting lines of pre-Islamic odes or recalling the arguments of philosophers, as if to remind himself that knowledge cannot be shackled. Historians still argue whether these years of confinement marked the true beginning of his philosophy. Some see it as the turning point, the moment when forced isolation allowed him to detach from the games of power and see history as a larger system. Others believe the seeds had already been planted earlier, and prison simply gave him time to refine them. Whatever the truth, you can sense the clarity that begins to glow quietly in his reflections. You lean closer, as if listening to his inner thoughts. He wonders, why do rulers trust flatterers but fear honesty? Why do alliances collapse so quickly? What binds a society together more tightly than decrees or armies? He recalls the strength of desert tribes, the loyalty they show one another, and contrasts it with the fragile bonds of courtly elites. Already, the pattern begins to emerge. Strength comes from unity, decline from luxury and division. The prison routine is monotonous. Days marked by simple meals, guards, footsteps echoing in corridors, the muffled sounds of life continuing beyond the walls. Yet in that monotony lies freedom of another kind, the freedom to think without interruption. He begins to see cycles everywhere. In dynasties, in families, in the rise and fall of his own fortunes. Just as day turns to night and back again, so too do societies flourish and decay. At times, he feels despair. There are nights when loneliness presses heavily, when he longs for conversation, for the rhythm of intellectual debate. He wonders if he will ever return to the world outside, or if his name will fade away behind these walls. But even in those darker hours, there is a stubborn spark. He recites to himself that patience is also a form of strength. In waiting there is wisdom. And there are moments almost oddly peaceful. You sit with him as he watches a shaft of sunlight creep across the wall, marking the hours. He listens to the flutter of birds outside the barred window, reminding him that life continues beyond his confinement. In these small details, he finds solace. If dynasties can collapse and still the world endures, perhaps his own fate, too, is just one part of a larger rhythm. Eventually, the tides shift. Political winds blow differently, and Ibn Khaldun is released. He steps once more into daylight, the sky blinding after so long in shadow. Yet he does not emerge unchanged. Prison has left its mark, not only in weariness but in insight. He now carries with him a deeper skepticism, a stronger sense that human affairs follow laws beyond individual will. He walks back into the world not simply as a courtier or scholar, but as someone who has tasted the fragility of fortune and glimpsed the patterns beneath it. For you, following his steps, the lesson is gentle but clear. In solitude, in forced silence, sometimes the deepest truths take shape. Ibn Khaldun's prison years, though bitter, ripened his thoughts in ways that palaces never could. And as he leaves those stone walls behind, you sense that the journey of his mind is only beginning. You walk now beneath the arches of Granada's Alhambra, where water murmurs through marble channels and the air is heavy with orange blossom. Ibn Khaldun has left the uncertainty of North Africa for a time, crossing the sea to the last Muslim stronghold in Spain. To you, the Alhambra feels like a dream made of stone. Palaces carved with delicate inscriptions, courtyards filled with the play of light and shadow, and poets reciting verses that echo softly against tiled walls. Here, Ibn Khaldun is not merely a courtier but a guest of kings, a man welcomed for his knowledge and sharpened mind. Granada at this moment stands on the edge of history. The Christian kingdoms are pressing ever closer, the shadow of Castile stretching toward Andalusia, inside the city walls. However, the court dazzles with refinement. Scholars, poets, and philosophers gather in quiet corners, debating ideas as though words themselves could shield the city from decline. For Ibn Khaldun, this is both familiar and strange. His own family once fled Andalusia generations earlier, yet now he returns as an honored envoy. One well-known fact is his diplomatic role in Granada, where he served the Nasrid Sultan Muhammad V and played a part in delicate negotiations with Castile. Trusted with these tasks, he proved his skill at balancing honesty and tact. He even secured the release of political exiles, earning both gratitude and envy. Yet despite his success, court life in Granada was no less treacherous than in Tunis or Fez. Jealousies simmered, alliances shifted, and the young scholar once again found himself walking on a knife's edge. There is also a gentler, almost charming detail. Ibn Khaldun formed a friendship with Ibn al-Khatib, the celebrated poet and vizier. Imagine the two of them strolling together through moonlit gardens, reciting lines of poetry, their voices mingling with the splash of fountains. They discussed philosophy, law, and the fragility of power, weaving their insights into verses and prose. For a brief time, Ibn Khaldun enjoyed not only political influence but also intellectual companionship, a respite from the harsh realities of Maghrebi courts. Historians still argue whether Ibn Khaldun truly belonged in Granada or whether his presence there was always temporary. Some say he might have settled and built his career in Andalusia if politics had been kinder. Others believe he was too restless, too tied to the currents of North Africa, to remain long in Spain. What is certain is that Granada left a deep impression on him, a vision of elegance and vulnerability entwined, a reminder that even the most beautiful civilizations carry within them the seeds of decline. You linger with him in a courtyard where the stars glimmer above and voices drift softly through the night. He listens to music played on the oud, the notes flowing like water, and you sense his mind balancing between delight and reflection. The court dazzles, but he cannot help noticing its fragility. The walls may glitter with poetry carved in stone, but beyond them the forces of history are moving, relentless as tides. During the day, he teaches students and counsels rulers. His reputation as a scholar grows, and younger men gather around him, eager to absorb his insights. He explains law and history, but always with a glimmer of something deeper, as though he is hinting that knowledge is not just memorization but a key to understanding why societies flourish and collapse. His words stir curiosity, even unease. At times he pauses to watch the ordinary life of Granada. Children chase one another in narrow streets, women draw water from fountains, merchants argue over silks and spices. He realizes that the strength of the city is not only in its rulers but in its people's cohesion, their Asabiyyah. When unity holds firm, a society endures. When it weakens, even the strongest walls cannot protect it. These quiet observations will later find their way into his great book, but for now, they remain seeds in his mind. And yet, beneath the beauty, tension grows. Political rivalries return, and Ibn Khaldun once again feels the shifting weight of intrigue. Whispers against him rise, jealousy sharpens, and before long, he decides that Granada, too, cannot hold him. His friendship with Ibn al-Khatib will be remembered, but the court itself will not become his permanent home. The cycle repeats. Favor turns to suspicion, opportunity to exile. He must move on. You walk with him as he prepares to leave, the Alhambra's walls glowing red in the sunset. The fountains murmur their eternal music. The carved poems on the walls speak of power and fragility, and Ibn Khaldun looks back one last time. He knows that what he has seen here, the blend of refinement and fragility, will remain with him, shaping the way he writes about the destiny of civilizations. For you, this chapter feels like a pause in his restless journey, a glimpse of beauty caught between storms. Granada offered him friendship, poetry, and a taste of Andalusia's fading glory, but it could not shelter him forever. He leaves once more, carrying with him not treasures of gold or silk but memories of elegance, the laughter of poets, and the quiet certainty that every civilization, no matter how splendid, is bound to the rhythm of rise and fall. You step with him now into the wide open spaces of North Africa, far from the perfumed air of palaces and the delicate arches of Granada. Ibn Khaldun turns his back on the courts for a time, retreating to the company of desert tribes. Here, the land itself feels immense, rolling hills of scrub and sand, tents pitched beneath stars so bright they seem close enough to touch, and the sound of hooves carrying across empty plains. It is a different rhythm, raw and untamed, and for Ibn Khaldun it becomes a school unlike any he has known. The tribes live simply compared to city dwellers, yet their strength is undeniable. You sit with him among them, drinking sour milk in leather cups, watching the firelight flicker on weathered faces. The men speak with a directness that the courts never knew, and their loyalty to one another is fierce. Here, Ibn Khaldun observes unity not enforced by decree or polished by ritual, but born from necessity. To survive in the harsh land, every member depends on the other. One well-known fact is that Ibn Khaldun spent several years among Berber tribes, sometimes as a guest, sometimes as a mediator, and sometimes as a political ally. This period provided him with first-hand experience of the societies he would later describe so vividly in his Muqaddimah. Unlike many scholars who wrote from the comfort of libraries, he lived among the people he analyzed, sharing their hardships and observing their strengths. And there is a curious, almost tender tidbit. Ibn Khaldun was said to enjoy listening to tribal songs and oral stories around the fire. He admired how history was preserved not just in books but in memory, carried in the rhythms of speech and the cadence of music. For a man so steeped in written scholarship, these oral traditions fascinated him, showing him another way that societies preserve themselves across generations. Historians still argue whether his retreat to the tribes was an act of exile, escape, or deliberate study. Some believe he had little choice. Pushed out of politics once again, he sought refuge where the reach of courts could not touch him. Others suggest he went willingly, tired of intrigue and drawn by the chance to study society in its rawest form. Whatever the motive, the result was profound. Here, in the desert, He refined his understanding of Asabiyyah, the binding force of solidarity that makes tribes strong and dynasties rise. You watch as he studies their way of life. He notes how leadership is earned through courage and trust rather than titles. He observes how scarcity of resources forces discipline, binding families together. He realizes that such solidarity creates resilience, so different from the luxury of cities, where abundance weakens bonds and rulers grow complacent. For him, the desert tribes embodied the beginning of every great dynasty, strong, united, unspoiled by decadence. At night, under the canopy of stars, he lies awake, thinking. The wind carries sand across the plains, whispering like time itself. He begins to see history not as random but as a cycle. Tribes bound by unity conquer cities. Cities softened by luxury eventually fall to new tribes. The pattern repeats endlessly, like the rise and setting of the moon. He senses that he is on the edge of something extraordinary, a theory that explains not only the fate of rulers but the destiny of civilizations. During the day he walks with herders as they move their flocks, feeling the strain of the sun, the dust in his throat, the weight of survival. He understands that hardship shapes strength, and that strength builds empires. The desert is no classroom, yet it teaches more vividly than any book. Every hardship endured here feels like a lesson written in the language of necessity, and yet, life among the tribes is not without its dangers. Ibn Khaldun witnesses disputes over grazing land, rival clans clashing over honor, and the ever-present threat of betrayal. Unity is strong, but fragile. A quarrel can tear apart bonds that once seemed unbreakable. He notes this too. Solidarity is powerful, but it must be maintained, nurtured, or it too will erode. There are moments of peace, though. You sit with him by the fire, listening as an elder tells a story of ancestors, of battles fought and migrations endured. The tale passed down through generations holds both history and myth. Ibn Khaldun listens intently, recognizing that memory itself is part of society's glue. Even legends, however embellished, serve to strengthen unity. When you rise with him at dawn, the horizon glowing pale orange, you sense how these years have changed him. He is no longer just a courtier shaped by marble halls. He is now a thinker who has seen the strength of simplicity, the resilience of tribes, and the inevitability of cycles. What he has learned here will form the backbone of his great work. As he mounts a horse and rides across the plains, his robe whipping in the wind, you feel the vastness of the world around him. The desert has stripped away the noise of politics, leaving clarity. Ibn Khaldun carries with him not only the memory of hardship and hospitality, but the conviction that history has laws as unyielding as the horizon itself. You sit beside him now at a wooden desk, ink pot within reach, parchment spread wide beneath his hand. The years of wandering, of courts and prisons and deserts, gather like clouds heavy with rain, and at last they pour forth. Ibn Khaldun begins to write the book that will secure his place among history's great thinkers. This is the Muqaddimah, the introduction, though in truth it is far more than a preface. It is a map of human society, a meditation on how civilizations live and die. The lamp flickers, throwing soft light across his face. His hand moves steadily, as though guided by something larger than himself. He writes of rulers and tribes, of solidarity and decay, of the strange rhythm that binds history together. He dares to suggest that society is not a mere collection of stories about kings and battles, but an organism with its own lifeblood and patterns. For you, listening in the quiet, it feels like watching a man carve order from the chaos of human experience. One well-known fact is that the Muqaddimah became a foundation for the study of history and sociology. Centuries before modern scholars, Ibn Khaldun outlined concepts that resemble social science, proposing that events follow observable rules rather than random fate. He saw economics, geography, and psychology not as separate, but woven together into the fabric of society. His work has been called astonishingly ahead of its time, a voice echoing into centuries he could never imagine. And there is a delightful, almost quirky detail. Ibn Khaldun was so meticulous that he often paused to sharpen his reeds, sometimes spending more time preparing them than actually writing. The shavings of those pens likely scattered across his desk like tiny relics of thought, each one a quiet testimony to the care he poured into his words. You can almost hear the scratch of the reed as it touches parchment, a sound steady as a heartbeat. Historians still argue whether Ibn Khaldun intended the Muqaddimah to stand on its own, or simply as the opening to his larger history. The Kitab al-Ibah, some believe he underestimated its significance, thinking it only a doorway to the main work. Others insist he knew its power, that he deliberately placed his boldest theories up front, confident they would outshine any chronicle of rulers. Whatever the case, the Muqaddimah became his most enduring legacy. You lean closer as he sets down his theories. He explains that dynasties begin with hardship and strength, when tribes bound by solidarity conquer cities. At first, rulers are disciplined, just, and close to their people. But over generations, luxury weakens them. They grow distant, indulgent, and divided. Eventually their Asabiyyah fades, and they fall to new tribes who repeat the cycle. It is as though civilizations breathe in and out, alive for a time before declining. He writes too of economics, how labor creates value, how wealth grows and shrinks depending on the balance between taxation and productivity. He explains that overtaxing kills prosperity, a lesson as relevant in his time as in any other. He studies geography, noting how climate and environment shape character, how desert life hardens people while abundance softens them. His scope is vast, connecting threads that most historians leave scattered. As you sit with him, you sense the rhythm of his days. In the mornings, he teaches or advises, his voice calm and deliberate. In the evenings, he withdraws to his writing, pouring his soul into ink until his hand aches. He pauses sometimes to stretch, to sip water, or simply to gaze into the distance, letting thoughts settle like dust in sunlight. Then he bends once more over the parchment, words flowing as though they had been waiting for centuries to be written. And beyond the walls of his study, the world continues its restless motion. Dynasties rise, wars rage, traders cross deserts, poets recite verses, and yet here he sits, capturing all of it in a language that reduces noise into pattern, chaos into order. He knows his theories may not please everyone. Rulers do not like to be reminded of their mortality, and elites dislike being told that their luxuries corrode their strength. But he writes anyway, confident that truth deserves its place, whether or not power welcomes it. There are evenings when you glimpse a softer side of him. He sets down the pen, rubs his eyes, and steps outside to breathe the night air. Children laugh in nearby streets, merchants pack up their stalls, and the city hums with life. He smiles faintly, reminded that all his theories, vast and sweeping, ultimately come back to ordinary people living their days. For all his cycles and patterns, he never forgets that history is built on human lives. When he returns to his desk, he continues with quiet determination. The Muqaddimah grows, chapter by chapter, until it becomes a world of its own, a mirror held up to society. You realize, sitting with him, that he has captured something timeless, the heartbeat of civilizations, written not with nostalgia or lament, but with calm inquiry. His work feels less like history and more like a guide to understanding humanity itself. And as the ink dries, you know that this moment will echo across centuries. His words, born in solitude and struggle, will travel further than he ever will, touching minds and lands he never dreamed of. For now, though it is just him, his reed pen, and the soft scratch of thought becoming text, you walk with him now through the bustling heart of Cairo, where the Nile glitters under sunlight and the city hums with energy. The air is thick with spice and smoke, merchants calling out in markets, camels groaning under heavy loads, scholars debating in courtyards shaded by carved wooden screens. To Ibn Khaldun, newly arrived here, the city feels like a universe of its own, a place of grandeur, noise, and endless movement. Compared to the shifting courts of North Africa or the fragile beauty of Granada, Cairo radiates permanence. The Mamluk Sultanate rules here, its soldiers once slaves, now masters of one of the richest realms of the Islamic world. Towers rise above crowded alleys, mosques gleam with minarets that pierce the sky, and caravans from every direction pour into the city. You sense Ibn Khaldun's awe, but also his cautious curiosity. Cairo dazzles, yes, but he cannot help measuring it against the patterns he has already seen. Strength born of discipline, fragility lurking behind excess. One well-known fact is that Ibn Khaldun became a judge in Cairo, appointed to the Maliki school of law. His reputation as a scholar had preceded him, and here his voice found authority not only in books but in the courts of justice. To hold such a position in Cairo was a sign of immense respect, a recognition that his wisdom was valued among the greatest minds of the time. Yet the task was not easy. Judgeships in Cairo were coveted, contested, and often dangerous. And here is a smaller, almost intimate tidbit. Ibn Khaldun had a habit of walking quietly along the Nile at dusk, seeking calm after long days of work. He watched fishermen hauling nets, children splashing at the river's edge, the great current carrying its endless waters northward. Those walks, simple and unnoticed by most, gave him space to breathe, to let his thoughts settle between the demands of the courtroom and the lure of his writings. Historians still argue whether Cairo offered him the stability he long sought, or whether it simply became another stage in his restless life. Some point out that he held the judgeship multiple times, appointed and dismissed in the shifting politics of the Mamluks. Others suggest he finally found in Cairo the recognition and influence he deserved. Even if the city's intrigues continued to test him, perhaps both are true, honor mixed with challenge, stability tinged with uncertainty. You follow him into a madrasa, where students gather to hear his lectures. His voice is calm, deliberate, never hurried. He explains law, but always with a philosopher's eye, connecting rules to broader questions of justice and society. Young men scribble notes eagerly, and you can feel their admiration. For them, Ibn Khaldun is not just a judge or historian, but a guide into the deeper workings of human life. His ideas born in solitude and deserts now resonate in classrooms beneath Cairo's domes. The city itself fascinates him. He studies its markets, where goods from India, Africa, and Europe mingle in a swirl of color and noise. He observes its guilds, its mosques, its neighborhoods layered with different peoples and traditions. To him, Cairo is a living example of a great civilization, rich, diverse, and powerful, yet also vulnerable to the same cycles he described in his book. He could not help but wonder, how long will this city's strength endure before new forces reshape it? At times he feels pulled in two directions. On one side, the duties of a judge demand constant attention, disputes to resolve, laws to interpret, fairness to uphold. On the other side, his restless mind hungers for solitude, for the chance to keep refining his theories. To expand on the Muqaddimah, you sense his inner tug-of-war, service to the community versus service to the life of the mind. And there are personal sorrows too. During his years in Cairo, he faced family losses, grief that left him quiet and withdrawn. He rarely spoke of it, but you notice how the weight of mourning deepened his reflections. Loss reminded him of the fragility not only of dynasties but of individual lives, each one a brief moment in the vast sweep of time. Still, Cairo embraced him. He walked its streets as both a scholar and a citizen, part of its endless rhythm. When he lectured in its madrasas, judged in its courts, or prayed in its mosques, he was woven into the city's fabric. His ideas found listeners, and his presence left an impression on those who met him. You pause with him one evening, standing on a balcony overlooking the city. The call to prayer rises, echoing from countless minarets, weaving through the noise of markets and the laughter of children. The sound fills the air like a tide washing over the city. Ibn Khaldun listens quietly, eyes distant. He knows that Cairo, with all its grandeur, is part of the same cycle as every city before it, strong now, but not eternal. Yet tonight, in this moment, it feels alive, radiant, a jewel set on the banks of the Nile. For you, walking beside him, the lesson is simple but deep. Cairo showed Ibn Khaldun not only the brilliance of human achievement, but the fragility hidden beneath it. And as he continued his service, balancing the weight of law with the pull of philosophy, you sense that he carried within him both wonder at the city's grandeur and the quiet certainty that even Cairo's story was part of the greater rhythm he had already described. The years have drawn him deeper into Cairo's embrace, yet they also lead him outward, into encounters he never expected. One of the most striking moments comes when Ibn Khaldun finds himself face to face with the conqueror, whose name still echoes through history, Timur, known in the West as Ta. The meeting takes place far from Cairo, during a period of upheaval, when the armies of Timur press into Syria, and the world trembles at his advance. You follow Ibn Khaldun as he journeys north, summoned by duty and circumstance. The road is heavy with tension, villages emptied by fear, and dust from soldiers marches thick in the air. When he finally enters Damascus, he sees a city bracing for siege, its people anxious, its walls looming with desperate resolve. And there, beyond the defenses, waits Timur, a ruler as formidable as any Ibn Khaldun has studied, a man who embodies both the strength and the terror of raw Asabiyyah. One well-known fact is that Ibn Khaldun personally met Timur during the siege of Damascus in 1401. Unlike many who faced Timur, he approached not with fear alone but with curiosity. The scholar in him could not help but see in Timur the living example of his theories. A tribal leader forged in hardship, now building an empire through discipline and ruthless cohesion. Meeting Timur was like watching the pages of his Muqaddimah come alive before his eyes. And there is an almost whimsical tidbit. Ibn Khaldun reportedly described climbing down the city walls in a basket to reach Timur's camp. Imagine it, the great philosopher of history, lowered like a merchant's parcel, swaying in mid-air before touching ground to meet the most feared man of his age. The image is both comical and profound, a reminder that even the greatest thinkers sometimes find themselves in the most unlikely situations. Historians still argue whether Ibn Khaldun was genuinely impressed by Timur or whether he merely flattered the conqueror out of necessity. Some claim he saw in Timur the embodiment of his theories, admiring his strength and unity. Others insist his praise was strategic, a way to protect himself and perhaps secure mercy for the city. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Admiration mixed with pragmatism, philosophy tempered by survival. When you stand beside him in Timur's tent, the air heavy with the scent of leather and smoke, you hear their conversations unfold. Ibn Khaldun speaks not as a trembling subject but as a scholar, explaining ideas, tracing histories, showing the conqueror how empires rise and fall. Timur, intrigued, listens. The two men, one wielding armies, the other wielding ideas, regard each other across the narrow space, each recognizing in the other a kind of power. For Ibn Khaldun, this meeting confirms what he has long believed. Timur's rise is no accident. It follows the pattern he has described. The fierce unity of his followers, the discipline of hardship, the energy of conquest. These are the marks of a new dynasty in its strongest phase. Yet Ibn Khaldun also knows that, like all dynasties, Timur's will one day wane. Even the mightiest conqueror cannot escape the rhythm of time. After days of negotiation, he returns to Damascus. The city, though battered, survives, though not without scars. People whisper of his daring, of how he spoke with Timur, as though with an equal, of how he managed to walk unharmed from the camp of a man who crushed kingdoms. For Ibn Khaldun, the episode is not just survival, it is a vivid confirmation of his theories. History is alive, unfolding before him, and he has been allowed to glimpse its engine at work. When he returns to Cairo, he carries stories that ripple through the madrasas and courts. Students lean forward as he recounts his encounter, their eyes wide, their pens scratching furiously. The image of their teacher speaking with Timur lingers in their minds, making his theories feel not abstract but proven in the crucible of reality. In the evenings, when he is alone, he reflects on what it all meant. The reed pen once again touches parchment, adding refinements to his work, clarifying ideas that the desert and now Timur's camp have confirmed. He writes with renewed conviction, not because he has been spared, but because he has seen with his own eyes that no empire, however vast, is immune to the cycle. You sit with him in the quiet Cairo's night, pressing close outside, as he sets down these thoughts. The lamps flicker and you hear again the steady scratch of the pen. He pauses sometimes, staring into the flame, remembering the smoky air of Timur's tent, the glint in the conqueror's eyes. Then he bends back to his task, adding another thread to the tapestry he has been weaving for decades. For you, the moment feels almost cinematic. The philosopher who braved the conqueror, the thinker whose ideas survived not only exile and hardship, but the gaze of Timur himself. The cycles he described are no longer theory. They are the rhythm of history itself, confirmed in the fire of experience. The years stretch gently now, and you find him older, his beard silvered, his movements slower but his mind still clear. Cairo has become his final home, the city where his restless journey settles into something quieter. The Nile flows steadily past, the markets continue their noisy rhythm, and Ibn Khaldun, though still a judge and teacher, begins to feel the weight of time. He walks through the narrow lanes of the city with measured steps, greeted by students who bow in respect, by merchants who know his face, by neighbors who whisper his name with reverence. He is no longer the young courtier chasing appointments, nor the exile fleeing intrigues. He is the elder, the sage, the one who has lived through storms and carried their lessons into words that others now study. One well-known fact is that Ibn Khaldun died in Cairo in 1406, after a lifetime of movement, service, writing, and reflection. His grave remains there, marking the end of a journey that had carried him across North Africa, into Andalusia, through deserts, into palaces and prisons, and even to the camp of Timur. His resting place in Cairo symbolizes not only his final years but his deep connection to the city that embraced him. And there is a quieter, less-known tidbit. In his final years, he often spoke of dreams. Friends and students recorded that he placed importance on them, seeing in dreams a kind of echo of the unseen, a reflection of the world beyond immediate perception. Perhaps for a man who spent his life tracing hidden patterns in history, dreams offered another path into the mysteries of existence. Historians still argue whether Ibn Khaldun considered himself primarily a historian, a philosopher, a jurist, or something else entirely. His work spans so many fields: law, politics, economics, sociology, education, that it resists easy classification. Some scholars call him the father of sociology, others a philosopher of history. Still others a jurist who happened to think broadly. The debates themselves are a testament to his vast reach, his refusal to fit neatly into one category. In his last days, you find him seated near a window, looking out over Cairo's rooftops. The call to prayer drifts across the air, mingling with the laughter of children in the street. His eyes are distant but calm. Perhaps he is thinking of Tunis, where he was born, of Granada, with its fragile beauty, of the desert, with its raw lessons, of Timur, fierce and implacable. Or perhaps he is simply letting the city's hum wash over him, content that he has left behind words that will endure. His students still gather, still hang on his words. They sense his frailty, but also his strength, the kind of strength that does not fade with age, because it comes from insight rather than force. He teaches not just with lectures but with the example of a life lived in pursuit of understanding, even when that pursuit led him through hardship. One evening, as the lamps glow and the Nile reflects the last shimmer of sunset, you walk with him through his memories. You recall the papyrus of his youth, the prison chains, the firelit songs of the tribes, the endless writing of the Muqaddimah, the tremble of ropes as he descended into Timur's camp. Each scene lingers like a page in a great, quiet book. His life has been a mosaic of movement and thought, of turbulence and stillness, of exile and belonging. When he passes in 1406, the city mourns quietly. The streets still bustle, the markets still trade, but among his students and peers, a silence spreads. A light has gone out, but the glow of his thought remains. His words travel further than he ever did, carried by readers across centuries, across continents, into futures he could never imagine. For you, seated at his side through this long journey, there is a gentle stillness. His story does not end with power or monuments, but with the quiet conviction of a man who believed that history itself could be understood, that societies follow rhythms as sure as the tide. His life fades, but his insight lingers, whispering still to those willing to listen. And now, with the last pages turned, with the lamps burning low, we reach the wind down of his tale. You breathe more slowly now, letting the noise of history soften into a gentle hum, like distant waves on a quiet shore. Ibn Khaldun's life, filled with movement and struggle, with pens scratching and deserts whispering, settles into a calm reflection. His theories, so bold, so clear, are no longer arguments but lullabies, patterns that soothe the mind with their rhythm. Civilizations rise, they fall, and then they rise again, an endless tide, steady as the breath you take now. You picture him beneath the Cairo sky, his hands folded, his gaze lifted toward the horizon. Around him the city continues, children laughing, merchants calling, the Nile flowing as it always has. The world moves on, but the thought he carried remains, like a lantern glowing softly in the dark. Let yourself drift with that image, the scholar at peace, the city alive, the river steady. There is no rush, no urgency, only the quiet truth that time holds us all, and that within its embrace, understanding brings calm. You are safe here in this story, in this moment, carried by the slow tide of words. So close your eyes, let the sounds of the night surround you, and drift gently into rest. Ibn Khaldun's journey is complete, and so is ours. May your dreams be light, your sleep deep, and your heart calm.